If you love mind-bending puzzles where nothing is what it seems, you need these 15 psychological thrillers on your radar right now. Get ready for shifting identities and ruthless mind games, because welcome back to Screen Curator, your ultimate watchlist engine. Kicking off our countdown at number 15 is Flower of Evil, a nerve-shredding masterpiece of domestic suspense that turns marital intimacy into a psychological battleground. On the surface, Baek Hee-sung is the ideal partner, a soft-spoken metal artisan who adores his young daughter and greets his homicide detective wife with a warm, easy smile. But in reality, that smile is a practiced mask, literally rehearsed in front of a mirror to conceal a stolen identity and a dark history linked to a notorious serial killer. The psychological tension becomes almost unbearable when his wife is assigned to a string of cold case homicides, completely unaware that the trail of bloody evidence points straight to the man sharing her bed. Director Kim Cheol-kyu masterfully transforms the cozy comfort of a family home into a suffocating arena of suspicion, weaponizing the quiet terror of realizing you might not actually know the person sleeping beside you. Lee Joon-gi turns in a mesmerizing performance, seamlessly shifting from a doting father to a chilling, empty-eyed survivor in a matter of seconds. If you crave a thriller that trades cheap scares for an agonizingly tense game of emotional cat and mouse, this one demands your attention. At number 14, Mouse takes a horrifying hypothetical and turns it into a high-octane moral nightmare. Imagine a society where a simple prenatal scan can detect a psychopathic gene with 99% accuracy, forcing the government to debate whether to eliminate potential killers before they take their first breath. Writer Choi Ran builds a relentlessly tense narrative around this dilemma, brilliant in how it weaponizes the squeaky clean, wholesome screen persona of lead actor Lee Sung-gi. Sung-gi plays young Barium, an endearingly gentle rookie officer who gets pulled into hunting a decapitating serial predator dubbed the Headhunter. Paired with a reckless, vengeance-driven detective, Barium seems like an innocent lamb walking straight into a slaughterhouse. But when a brutal, near-fatal confrontation leaves the young cop radically altered, the narrative violently fractures. Mouse completely abandons standard police procedural tropes, hurling you into a sprawling web of shifting perspectives, manipulated memories, and terrifying identity flips that render every safe assumption worthless. It is a sheer masterclass in psychological tension that leaves you breathless, forcing you to question who the real monster is, and keeping you obsessively rewriting your own theories all the way to the final frame. At number 13 on our list, Strangers from Hell takes the universal anxiety of moving to a new city and twists it into a localized nightmare. We follow Yoon Jong-woo, an aspiring writer arriving in Seoul with empty pockets who is forced to rent a dirt cheap room at Eden Studio. It's a dilapidated boarding house with paper-thin walls, flickering light bulbs, and narrow, decaying hallways shot to feel like a physical cage. The real terror isn't the grime on the wallpaper, though. It's the monsters sharing his communal floor. From an uncomfortably aggressive brute to a chillingly polite dentist who takes an unsettlingly personal interest in him, every neighbor radiates a quiet, predatory malice. The show excels at weaponizing everyday sensory horrors, slapping sandals on cold tiles, dripping faucets, and sinister giggles echoing through dark corridors to slowly grind down Jong-woo's grip on reality. You spend the series trapped inside his head, forced to figure out whether these eccentric strangers are mounting a sadistic conspiracy against him, or if the sheer pressure of his environment is driving him insane. If you crave a psychological thriller that marinates in suffocating dread, urban isolation, and relentless paranoia, this 10-episode fever dream delivers an intensely claustrophobic experience you won't easily shake off. At spot number 12, Beyond Evil proves that the most terrifying monster in a small town is often the man wearing the badge next to you. Set in the quiet, desolate reed fields of Manyang, this series redefines the procedural by turning its dual lead investigators into an explosive pressure cooker of paranoia. Lee Dong-sik is a broken local cop demoted after being named the prime suspect in his twin sister's disappearance 20 years ago. Enter Han Ju-won, a pristine, high society inspector assigned as his supervisor who arrives convinced that Dong-sik is a cold-blooded killer, but when a series of severed fingertips surface in the mud, matching the exact gruesome signature of that cold case, the line between hunter and hunted completely dissolves. What makes this an absolute triumph isn't just the jaw-dropping twists, but the unhinged psychological warfare between Shin Ha-kyun and Yeo Jin-gu. Every shared glance, forced laugh, and tense interrogation feels like a game of Russian roulette, where nobody is innocent and the entire town is hiding a sinister secret. If you crave a dark, atmospheric thriller packed with lingering trauma, corrupt institutions, and mind-bending betrayals, this masterclass in suspense will keep you up until 4 in the morning. Sailing into the 11th spot on our countdown, Through the Darkness takes us back to late 1990s South Korea, a time when police work was driven purely by brute force and physical evidence. This haunting series dramatizes the true story of the country's very first criminal profilers, starring Kim Nam-gil as Song Ha-young, a quiet officer whose immense empathy makes him uniquely suited and tragically vulnerable to stepping inside the minds of monsters. When a string of motiveless attacks leaves the nation paralyzed by fear, Ha-young and his visionary supervisor must fight through institutional skepticism to build behavioral analysis from scratch. Forget high-octane Hollywood car chases. The true battleground here is the claustrophobic interrogation room. Adapted from the memoirs of South Korea's actual pioneer profiler, the show deliberately casts disarmingly average-looking actors as its killers, driving home the terrifying reality that evil rarely looks like a monster. It is an excruciatingly tense, character-driven slow burn that focuses heavily on the unbearable psychological tax paid by those who stare into the abyss for a living. If you appreciate gritty, methodical procedural thrillers that prioritize deep human tension over cheap jump scares, this 12-episode masterpiece demands a place on your queue. At number 10, we step into the bleak, haunting atmosphere of Children of Nobody. This is not your typical glossy Korean drama. It is a relentless noir that pulls you straight into the mind of Cha Wook-young, a gentle child counselor whose life disintegrates after a tragic car accident. Following the crash, Wook-young is haunted by terrifying visions of a mysterious little girl in a green dress, a figure that seamlessly intersects with a horrific real-world investigation. A vigilante operating under the alias Red Cry is executing unpunished child abusers, leaving lines of classic Korean poetry at every crime scene as gruesome signatures. Alongside a hardened detective, Wook-young chases these poetic clues through a dense fog of trauma and moral decay, forcing us to question where justice ends and vengeance begins. With its desaturated visual palette and razor-sharp psychological weight, Children of Nobody relies on pure tension and raw emotional stakes rather than cheap shock tactics. If you crave a dark, deliberate mystery that respects your intelligence and refuses to grant easy answers, this unforgettable series deserves an immediate place on your watch list. Coming in at number 9, Stranger turns an icy surgical lens on institutional corruption, delivering one of the most meticulously constructed mysteries in modern television. Our entry point into this spiderweb is prosecutor Hwang Saimok. A childhood brain surgery stripped him of his ability to feel empathy or emotional influence, leaving behind a mind operating on pure, unyielding logic. In a world driven by favors, bribes, and political backscratching, Saimok is a singular anomaly, a man who literally cannot be bought, flattered, or intimidated. When a seemingly straightforward murder investigation uncovers a trail of corporate kickbacks reaching the highest levels of government, Saimok aligns with Lieutenant Han Yo-jin, an intuitive detective whose grounded warmth acts as the story's moral compass. Together, they navigate a hostile environment where every superior, colleague, and old friend carries a hidden motive. Because the series was entirely pre-produced before airing, the narrative unfolds with incredible mathematical precision. Every casual conversation and drop document feels loaded with intent, transforming standard office politics into a tight psychological chess match. Stranger resists cheap jump scares and flashy action, opting instead for a suffocating paranoia where the system itself is the antagonist. If you crave a cerebral, slow-burn thriller that relentlessly rewards an observant viewer, Stranger is essential viewing. Sliding into spot number 8, the 2022 mystery thriller Blind takes a standard courtroom setup and instantly turns it into a relentless paranoid trap. The story kicks off with the grisly Joker murder case, where a serial killer leaves victims with terrifying carved smiles. Hot-headed homicide detective Ryu Sung-joon nails a suspect, his cold perfectionist judge brother presides over the trial, and 9 ordinary citizens hand down a guilty verdict on the jury panel. That should be the end of it. Except the moment the trial closes, those exact 9 jurors start getting picked off one by one in brutal retribution. What makes Blind an absolute masterclass in psychological tension is how aggressively it turns the mirror on its own protagonist. The series weaponizes memory and blackouts, dropping just enough terrifying clues to make you question whether our hero detective is hunting the monster or actually becoming him. Layered over a dark, decades-old institutional conspiracy where every single character holds a piece of a tragic puzzle, Blind keeps you constantly second-guessing every hero and villain. If you want a thriller that treats trust like a luxury you cannot afford, put this one right at the top of your queue. Claiming the 7th spot on our countdown is the uncompromising psychological thriller, The King of Pigs. Adapted from the blistering debut feature of Train to Busan director Yeon Sang-ho, this 12-episode series was so relentlessly intense, it earned a strict 19+ rating in South Korea and made history as the first drama series ever invited to the Fantasia International Film Festival. The nightmare begins at a grim crime scene where a murderer leaves a message scrawled in blood, addressed directly to Detective Young Jong-suk. The killer is his former middle school classmate, Hwang Kyung-min, a man who has spent 2 decades harboring suffocating trauma from relentless school abuse before finally embarking on a violent crusade. What follows is a high-stakes hunt across Seoul, where Kyung-min systematically targets their former tormentors, forcing his detective friend to confront the agonizing hierarchy that broke them both as children. The King of Pigs refuses to offer easy, moral, comforting answers. It weaponizes memory, constantly pulling you between present-day carnage and the oppressive weight of childhood trauma. If you want a dark, visceral mystery that trades generic formulas for sheer psychological gravity, this masterclass in tension demands your immediate attention. Landing at number 6 on our countdown is the deeply unsettling thriller Save Me. When a grieving, financially ruined family moves to the rural backwaters of Muji County, they become easy prey for Gosianwan, a predatory pseudo-religious cult disguised as a peaceful sanctuary. Led by a terrifyingly charismatic spiritual father, the cult slowly brainwashes the father, isolates the mother, and traps their teenage daughter, Sang-mi, inside a high-walled compound. What makes Save Me so thoroughly terrifying isn't supernatural forces, but the suffocating reality of communal gaslighting. For 3 agonizing years, Sang-mi is trapped in a town where the police, politicians, and neighbors are all complicit in the madness. Her only lifeline comes when she spots 4 former high school classmates in a crowded alley and frantically whispers 2 words, "Save me." What follows is a heart-in-your-throat rescue attempt carried out not by elite detectives, but by 4 under-resourced country boys taking on an entire corrupt system. If you crave a psychological thriller that trades easy jump scares for unrelenting tension and visceral, slow-burn paranoia, this masterpiece of systemic dread belongs right at the top of your queue. Breaking into our top 5, the relentless high school crime thriller Extracurricular throws out the shiny, romanticized aesthetic of traditional Korean television and drags you straight into the mud. By day, Oh Jisoo is the ultimate invisible model student, quiet, obedient, and pulling top marks. But to fund his dream of attending university, he runs a surprisingly sophisticated illegal security network for adult entertainment workers using an anonymous mobile app. His precarious double life holds perfectly until Bae Gyu-ri, an elite, deeply cynical classmate, swipes his burner phone. She doesn't expose him. Instead, desperate to escape her own suffocating family, she blackmails her way into his operation. What follows is a terrifying domino effect spiral where every quick fix triggers a worse catastrophe. Extracurricular excels because it refuses to pull its punches. These are brilliant, broken teenagers completely out of their depth, making frantic decisions inside grimy Korean subways and dimly lit motel corridors. The panic is tangible, the pacing is downright vicious, and the tension never lets you breathe. If you love stories where ordinary people are swallowed whole by their own desperate choices, you need to fire this up immediately. Sailing into our 4th spot is Mask Girl, a wild shape-shifting nightmare that exposes the darkest corners of modern internet culture. By day, Kim Mo-mi is an invisible office worker crushed by societal beauty standards. By night, she puts on a shimmering mask and performs for thousands of adoring online fans as a live streaming sensation. But what starts as a sharp critique of toxic lookism violently mutates when an obsessed coworker uncovers her true identity, spiraling into a chaotic chain of murder, altered faces, and vengeful mothers. What makes this 7-episode thriller so wildly unpredictable is its refusal to stay in one lane. Each chapter completely reframes the story through a new character's warped perspective, shifting the tone from dark comedy to gruesome crime serial. The production even pulled off a stroke of casting genius by using 3 entirely different actresses to play Mo-mi across her life's brutal eras, anchored by a debut performance from Lee Han-byeol, who beat out 1,000 hopefuls for the role. It is an unhinged, visually striking ride that constantly evolves, making Mask Girl an absolute essential for anyone craving a story that refuses to play by the rules. At number 3 on our list, we arrive at the cold, hyper-calculated world of Pyramid Game, a relentless thriller that turns a high school classroom into a high-stakes survival arena. Inside Class 25 at Baekhyun Girls High School, social standing isn't decided by casual popularity. It is dictated by a secret monthly app vote. Students are ranked from grade A down to grade F, and whoever lands at the absolute bottom is officially designated as an open target for systemic, unchecked bullying. When transfer student Seong Suji receives 0 votes on her very first day, she is instantly cast down to grade F. But rather than cowering as a passive victim, Suji chooses to treat this cruel sociopathic system like a grandmaster chessboard. What makes the show so electrifying to watch is her pivot into a tactical strategist, quietly mapping out classroom rivalries, exploiting personal anxieties, and engineering a subtle insurgent uprising from the inside. Every digital ping of the voting app carries unbearable tension, and every fake smile conceals a trap. If you crave smart, pressure cooker thrillers driven by raw mind games, Pyramid Game is essential viewing. Sitting at the runner-up spot on our list is Signal, a relentless masterpiece of temporal tension that completely redefines the modern crime thriller. The nightmare begins in 2015 when Park Hae-young, a deeply cynical criminal profiler, uncovers a battered walkie-talkie in a trash heap. The radio has no batteries, yet precisely at 11:23 p.m., it crackles to life with the voice of Detective Lee Jae-han speaking directly from 1989. What starts as a desperate attempt to solve an unsolved cold case transforms into a terrifying game of cause and effect. Based heavily on South Korea's real-world cold cases, including the horrific crimes that inspired memories of murder, Signal forces its leads to realize that changing the past never comes cheap. Prevent a murder 30 years ago and you might instantly rewrite the present in horrifying ways, erasing loved ones or creating brand new crime scenes overnight. Director Kim Won-suk heightens this dread by dynamically shifting the screen's aspect ratio between decades, trapping you in the distinct visual language of two colliding eras. It is a razor-sharp, emotionally devastating thriller where every second on the clock carries tragic, unyielding consequences. If you want a story that respects your intelligence while pulverizing your nerves, this is essential viewing. Taking our ultimate #1 spot as the undisputed king of mind games is the razor-sharp masterclass Liar Game. On paper, the premise sounds like a twisted reality show. Debt-ridden, painfully honest college student Nam Do-jung receives 10 billion won in a briefcase, thrown into a televised tournament where stealing and deception are the only path to survival. But when her own former high school teacher immediately tricks her out of every single cent, Da-jung turns to the ultimate equalizer. Ha Woo-jin, a brilliant former psychology professor fresh out of prison who reads micro-expressions like open books. What makes this South Korean adaptation outshine every competitor on our list is how it turns pure game theory into a high-stakes psychological war zone. Instead of relying on cheap physical shock value, the tension explodes entirely through social manipulation, shifting alliances, and complex strategies designed to exploit human empathy. Watching Woo-jin systematically outsmart a rigged system while protecting someone far too innocent for this cutthroat world creates a thriller that never lets you breathe. If you only pick one show from this list to completely devour in a single sitting, make it Liar Game. It is the absolute pinnacle of Korean suspense television. Because the human brain will always try to rationalize the darkest monsters, even when those monsters are staring right back at us from the mirror. But if you loved how these K-dramas mess with your head and unravel your perception of reality, you need to check out our deep dive into the psychological thriller movies that will completely break your brain. Tap the screen to watch it right now.